I didn't understand why the police suddenly showed up that night, right after I had finished lighting a candle for my late wife. But I knew one thing: the item my son, Brandon, had slipped into my briefcase that afternoon. I had already moved it to his sock drawer, and he thought I didn't know. It was a sweltering night. The air in Phoenix, Arizona was still thick and humid. The faint smell of yesterday's rain still clung to the walls of our house, half wood, half stucco. It was simple, but well maintained. Now only 3 of us lived here. Myself, Raiden Miller, 58, Brandon, 29, and my daughter-in-law, Kayla, 24. It was the 40th day since my wife, Maureen, had passed. After the small memorial gathering attended by a few neighbors, I retreated to the back room. Sitting near our fading wedding photo, I could still hear her last whisper in my ear as she lay dying in the hospital. If he crosses the line, don't let your anger be the answer. Let the universe handle it. I didn't understand what she meant then. Now I was starting to. I saw Brandon walk past the bedroom door, then stop in the living room. His movements were odd, pacing, glancing around like a thief in his own home. He opened my briefcase, the dark blue canvas bag I always took to construction sites. From behind the slightly ajar door, I saw him slide something from his pocket into the large compartment of the bag. His face was calm, but his eyes were restless. He peeked left, then right, and carefully closed the zipper. I waited until he went to the kitchen for a drink. The moment he was out of sight, I went to the bag and checked it. Tucked inside the main compartment, hidden beneath my work gloves, was a small black paper-wrapped bundle. I picked it up. It felt solid, heavy, not empty paper. I didn't open it. My gut told me, don't panic, don't speak, observe first. I quietly took the package to his bedroom, opened his dresser, and pulled out the bottom drawer where he kept his socks and underwear. I slipped the bundle in there, under the pile of clothes, making sure its position was neatly covered. Then I returned to the back room as if nothing had happened. About 30 minutes later, as I was rinsing glasses in the kitchen from the memorial, there was a loud knock at the front door. Not a casual knock. It was firm, repeated, and authoritative. Brandon and Kayla, who were in the living room, immediately stood up. They exchanged glances. Their faces feigned surprise, but I knew it was an act. I opened the door. Standing there were 3 police officers. The one in front was a woman in full uniform. Her face was stern, her eyes sharp. She introduced herself as Detective Reese from the Chandler Police Department. "Good evening, Mr. Miller. We've received a tip regarding the possible storage of evidence from a jewelry store heist on Main Street. We need to search your home." I didn't answer immediately. I just gave a slow nod and opened the door wider. "Please come in, Detective." They entered with measured steps. Brandon stood in the corner of the living room. His hands trembled slightly. Kayla stood next to him. Her face was pale, but a thin smile played on her lips. I stood in the middle, silently waiting. Detective Reese looked at me for a moment, then at Brandon. "Who made the report?" Brandon took a shaky breath. Then, with a quivering voice and a forced calm expression, he pointed at me. "It's in his briefcase. I saw an expensive ring there this afternoon. I suspect it's from the robbery yesterday." Kayla immediately gripped his arm. Her voice was soft, too soft. "Dad, just say it was an accident. We can sort this out. You wouldn't do this intentionally." I remained silent. I looked at them one by one. No one believed me that night. Not a single soul. Detective Reese asked for permission to check my briefcase, which was still on the coffee table. I nodded. "Go ahead, Detective. Search as you like." The 2 other officers began carefully emptying the bag's contents. Work gloves, a tape measure, notes on Mr. Jackson's home renovation project, a small screwdriver, a pocket notebook, an empty pack of cigarettes, a small wallet with loose change. They opened the main pocket, then the side pocket, then the deepest pocket. Nothing. No ring, no black paper bundle. Brandon began to panic, his voice rising. "It should be there. I saw it this afternoon. Behind the gloves. It has to be there." Detective Reese glanced at me. I offered a slow shrug, as if to say, "I'd like to know too." Brandon grew frantic. He rushed to the bag, frantically re-examining its contents himself with shaking hands. This is impossible. I saw it. I put it there. I saw it myself. Kayla gently pulled on Brandon's arm, whispering something I couldn't clearly hear, but her eyes darted to me with a cold stare. Detective Reese stood up straight, watching Brandon with suspicion. Are you certain you saw this object in this bag, sir? Yes, Brandon trailed off. His face was ashen. One of the officers suddenly asked, Mr. Miller, do you have any surveillance cameras on the property? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked toward the fence, toward Mr. Reyes' house, whose camera pointed directly at our living room. I knew that camera was active. I'd known for 2 years since Mr. Reyes installed it after a motorcycle theft on this block. My house doesn't have one, I replied softly. But the neighbor next door has a camera pointed this way. Detective Reese nodded. Okay, we'll check that too. Brandon stumbled back a step. His face went from panic to terror. But Detective Reese held up a hand. We'll continue the search. If there's nothing here, you have nothing to worry about. But if anyone is guilty, we will process them. That night, our usually quiet house was filled with the sound of unfamiliar footsteps. Neighbors peeked over the fence. Whispers began to circulate. I just stood in the corner holding a glass of water I didn't drink, staring at my son, whose face was now deathly pale. And in my head, only one phrase kept repeating, let the universe handle it. It wasn't because I didn't love my son. It was because I'd been too loving, too soft for too long. So much so that he thought he could frame me without consequence. But that night, for the first time, I chose silence. Not out of fear, but because I was tightening the very trap he had set. After my wife Maureen passed away, I chose not to remarry. My focus was singular, raising Brandon and maintaining this house. It was a simple, warm home, a modest inheritance from my parents. I worked as a handyman, sometimes a small-time foreman on renovation projects around the area. The income was tight, but enough for the 3 of us and the electric bill. Brandon had attended community college for 2 years, majoring in business, but dropped out. His excuses were always the same. The system doesn't fit me. The professors are too rigid. My peers aren't on the same path. I said nothing then. I thought he needed time to find his way. It turned out the only path he found was a way to constantly ask for money. He stayed at home, without a steady job. Sometimes he claimed to be working on design projects on his computer, but more often I saw him on his smartphone in his room until dawn. I never pushed. I just hoped that one day he would figure things out for himself. 2 years ago, he married Kayla. She came from a family that had recently lost everything after her parents' small business went bankrupt due to a loan shark scam. I didn't object. Kayla seemed polite, cooked often, and Brandon looked happy. I even helped pay for the small courthouse wedding. I sold my old Vespa scooter, which I'd bought with the earnings from my first big project, for $1,000. I gave all the money to them. But after they married, the demands for money never stopped. First, Brandon asked for $15,000 to open a coffee stand. He claimed a friend was partnering with him. The location was perfect, and it was guaranteed to succeed. I sold the last of my mother's jewelry, a few pieces Maureen had kept. 3 months later, the stand closed. The excuse? The location turned out to be too quiet. The partner ran off with the seed money. Then he asked for $5,000 for a security deposit on a new apartment. He said they wanted to move out so they wouldn't burden me. I pulled the money from my small retirement savings at the bank. They never moved. The money simply vanished. When Kayla fainted and was rushed to the clinic, Brandon said they needed $2,000 for internal exams and comprehensive blood tests. He claimed the doctor suspected a hormonal imbalance. I borrowed the money from our HOA president, Mr. Peterson, agreeing to pay it back over 6 months. The diagnosis? Mild stress, treatable with just regular vitamins. In total, over 2 years, I had given them almost $50,000. My savings were nearly depleted. My body was starting to break down from working too hard at an age when I should have been slowing down. My back ached constantly from lifting bags of cement. When I finally said I couldn't give them any more, Brandon got angry. His voice was loud, his eyes red. If Mom were still here, she would help. She never said no. I just lowered my head. The pain was worse than my cramping back, worse than the cuts on my hands from rusty tools, because I knew he never felt enough, never felt grateful, only entitled. A few days before the police incident, Brandon suddenly announced he'd landed a job at a tech startup in Silicon Valley. He claimed he was designing app interfaces. The salary was decent, he said. I didn't quite understand the job, but I was thrilled to hear it. I thought, this is it. Maybe he's finally growing up. Kayla cooked more often than usual. She even posted an update on her social media. Thank God, finally a breakthrough. I saw it myself on my old smartphone. I smiled then. There is still hope, I thought. They invited me to a small celebration dinner in the backyard. Simple fare, chicken skewers and rice wrapped in banana leaves, picked up from a local spot. It wasn't fancy, but the atmosphere was warm, or at least they tried to make it look warm. But I noticed something strange. Throughout the evening, Brandon's demeanor was too calm, too many smiles, too much small talk, like someone hiding a great secret. Kayla was the same. She glanced at me occasionally with a look I couldn't quite place, not warm, but assessing. In the late afternoon of the celebration, as I was cleaning up the charcoal from the grill, I saw it from the corner of my eye. Brandon opened my briefcase, which was lying near the back door. He slipped something into the large pocket of the bag and then carefully closed it. His movement was quick, practiced. After that, he turned on a small fan, pretending to help Kayla with the drinks. I pretended not to see. I went inside, saying I was going to get the barbecue sauce, but what I really did was grab the bag, take it to the bathroom, and open it with shaking hands. Inside, behind the crumpled work gloves, was the black paper bundle. I slowly opened it. Inside was a large diamond ring. Its color was a pale yellow, sparkle piercing the eye, even under the dim bathroom light. It felt heavy in my hand. This was not a cheap item. This wasn't something you bought with a handyman salary like mine. I touched its surface. It was cold, but my hands and heart felt scorched. I quickly left the bathroom and went to Brandon's room while he was still in the backyard. I opened his dresser, the bottom drawer where he kept his socks and underwear. I slipped the ring in there, ensuring it was neatly covered as if no one had ever touched it. I returned to the backyard. My face was expressionless. Brandon asked with a smile, "Dad, did you find the sauce?" I answered flatly, "Yeah, Kayla's barbecue sauce is still as good as ever." Kayla smiled widely, too forced. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in the back room facing Maureen's photo, holding her small, worn prayer book. I whispered softly, "Tomorrow you'll see who is truly your son, and who is just a name on a family card." I didn't cry, didn't rage. I only felt a strange emptiness, like a gaping hole in my chest that couldn't be filled. I'd lost my wife. Now it seemed I was losing my son too. But I would not lose my sanity. I would not lose the truth. And I would not allow myself to be destroyed by the person I had once held when he had a fever, fed when he was sick, and supported when he learned to walk. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked at the dark Phoenix night sky, heavy with clouds. No stars, only darkness, like my son's heart. The next morning, Brandon woke up earlier than usual. He sat in the living room playing on his smartphone. Occasionally, he glanced at my briefcase still lying on the table. His face was calm, but I knew he was waiting for something. I walked out, pretending to go to the corner store for a pack of cigarettes. On the way, I stopped by Mr. Reyes's house. He was sweeping his front yard. "Mr. Reyes, your camera is still active, right?" I asked, lighting my cigarette. "Oh, yes, Mr. Miller. I actually just replaced the hard drive with a bigger one yesterday." "Why do you ask?" "No reason, just curious. If something ever happened, could I ask to see the footage?" Mr. Reyes nodded. "Of course, man. Anytime. No worries." I smiled faintly and headed back home. Everything was ready. All that was left was for them to make the final move. And that evening, the police knock on the front door was the clearest sound I'd ever heard. Not the sound of an enemy, but the sound of liberation. If I had yelled, countered their accusation, or exposed what I saw, who would have believed me? An aging widower living in a simple house versus a young married man who had just gotten a job and seemed full of promise? No, I chose another way. I took back control with silence, a deadly silence. After my briefcase was thoroughly searched in the living room with no result, Detective Reese looked at me differently. Not suspicious, but contemplative. Brandon and Kayla stood in the corner, their faces pale. Brandon was getting agitated. His hands nervously rubbed the edge of his shirt. "It should be in the main pocket. I saw it this afternoon." His voice pitched higher, bordering on panic. "He must have moved it," Kayla chimed in with a forced softness. Maybe Dad moved it somewhere else without realizing. He's been distracted lately." Her eyes flickered to me, trying to manipulate the police, implying I was a senile old man who forgot where he put things. Detective Reese didn't answer right away. She walked around the living room, examining every corner. Her gaze was sharp, now focused not on me, but on the young couple. I knew she was starting to smell something wrong. Calmly, I said, "If you feel the need, Detective, please check my son's room. I have nothing to hide." Kayla instantly panicked. "Dad, why go that far? This is just a small misunderstanding." Brandon became hysterical. "He's just pretending. He hid it somewhere else. He must have known I was suspicious, so he moved it." Detective Reese raised a hand, signaling them to be quiet. "All right, we will search Mr. Brandon Miller's room." Brandon's face shifted from panic to sheer terror. He backed up a step. "There's no need for that, Detective. This must have been a mistake on my part. Maybe I remembered wrong." "If you remembered wrong, why did you involve the police, Mr. Miller?" Detective Reese asked, her tone flat but penetrating. Brandon didn't answer. His mouth was open, but no words came out. Two officers went upstairs to Brandon's room, accompanied by Detective Reese. I, Brandon, and Kayla waited below. The atmosphere was silent and tense. The only sounds were footsteps on the wooden floor above and the muffled noise of a dresser being opened. In less than 10 minutes, one of the officers came downstairs carrying an evidence bag. Inside was the black paper-wrapped bundle I knew so well. Detective Reese descended with a serious expression. She placed the evidence bag on the coffee table. "We found this in Mr. Miller's bedroom dresser in the bottom drawer, hidden beneath a stack of socks." She opened the black paper with a gloved hand. Inside, a white gold ring with a large diamond sparkled brightly, reflecting light around the room. Brandon's face instantly turned corpse-like. His hands trembled violently. He cried out, his voice nearly breaking, "That's it! My father put that there. He switched it back to my room. I was only trying to help the family, but I was framed." Kayla started to cry, but her sobs were strange. They came too quickly and stopped just as fast when she realized an officer's phone camera was recording. Detective Reese was unmoved. She meticulously documented the location of the discovery, photographing the dresser, the drawer's position, and the ring from various angles. Then she made a phone call. "Come to the location now, bring the equipment. We need to check the neighbor's camera." I just stood in the corner, arms crossed, staring at my son, who was now trembling uncontrollably. There was no sense of triumph in my heart, only a cold emptiness. Soon after Mr. Reyes was called over, he arrived looking confused. "What is it, officer?" "We need to see the footage from your security camera that faces the neighboring house," Detective Reese stated. Mr. Reyes nodded. He went home briefly and returned with a small playback device that could be connected to the TV. An officer hooked it up to the small television in our living room. The recording started. The image was clear enough, even from the side. Our living room was visible from the angle of the fence. The time on the screen showed the late afternoon, the day before the police arrived. In the recording, Brandon was seen pacing near my briefcase. He glanced around nervously, making sure no one was watching. Then he took something from his pocket, opened the bag, and slipped the object into the large compartment. He carefully closed the bag, then stood up and walked calmly to the back of the house. The room was silent, only the sound of the recording audible. Detective Reese paused the footage. She looked at Brandon with a penetrating gaze. "Would you like to explain this, Mr. Miller?" Brandon was sweating profusely. That was just a prank. That's not what this is about. I was just what?" Detective Reese's voice was firm. Leaving no room for excuses, Brandon fell silent. His body shook violently. Kayla looked down, her hands wringing the hem of her shirt. Detective Reese picked up the ring, placing it into a formal evidence bag with a label and seal. "We will take this item for further investigation, Mr. Brandon Miller. We require you to come down to the police station for clarification." "I won't go!" Brandon screamed. "This is a setup. My father set me up." Detective Reese didn't respond. She signaled the two officers. Brandon was not handcuffed, but was firmly escorted out. Kayla tried to follow. "I'm coming with my husband, Detective." "No need. We only require the gentleman right now," one of the officers said. Before leaving, Brandon managed to whisper to Kayla. His voice was raw and desperate. "Don't say anything. Wait for me." Kayla nodded faintly. Her face was expressionless. The patrol car drove away with Brandon inside. The sound of the engine faded, then disappeared into the night. The house returned to silence. Mr. Reyes went home after giving a brief statement. Kayla went into the bedroom without saying a word. I stood on the porch, lighting a cigarette, staring at the empty street in front of the house. There was no relief, no victory, only a vast, cold emptiness yawning in my chest. The son I once held was now being driven away by the police, a result of his own actions. And I was simply standing here, smoking in the silence. It felt like a nightmare that would never end. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the back room and opened the old laptop I rarely used. I logged into my online banking account. My eyes scanned the screen carefully. Then I saw it. A deposit of $4,000 made a week ago. Not from Brandon, but from an account named Kayla Arini. I clicked on the transaction details. 2 hours after the money was deposited, an identical amount was transferred out to an online gaming account. I recognized the site's name, a gambling website. I printed out all the transaction statements from the last 6 months, page after page tumbling from the old printer in the corner. I read them one by one, meticulously. There were 11 suspicious transactions. Money was deposited from Kayla's account, then transferred out to various gaming and betting sites within hours. The amounts varied. $3,500, $5,800, a total of almost $40,000 in 6 months. I put the papers on the table, my hands trembling. Not from anger, but because I finally understood. This was no sudden plan. This was a long-term scheme. A plan carefully and slowly constructed to drain everything I had left. I stood up and walked to my room. On the wall hung a wedding photo of Brandon and Kayla. They were smiling widely. Brandon hugged Kayla with apparent love. I stood beside them, smiling proudly. I took the photo down. I turned it over, and on the back of the frame, there was a small note written in marker. To our dear dad, thank you for everything. I smiled bitterly. Thank you for everything, including the money they gambled away, including the plan to frame me and send me to jail, including the house they wanted once I was gone. I placed the photo face down in a drawer. I wouldn't throw it away, but I wouldn't look at it again either. Tomorrow, I would go to the police and bring all this evidence. And this time, I wouldn't be standing there as the suspect. They would be. I used to think revenge was an act of ego. But when I saw my money used by my son for online gambling and his wife secretly pulling from my late wife's savings, I realized this was no longer about betrayal. This was about being utterly consumed by the people I had nurtured with love. The next morning, I went to Mrs. Rodriguez's convenience store at the end of the block, not for cigarettes, but to ask questions. Mrs. Rodriguez was a known gossip, but her gossip was often helpful. She knew a lot about the people around here. "Ma'am, Brandon often borrows a car from here, right?" I asked, buying a packet of instant coffee. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded while stirring the chili in a large pot of tamales. "Yeah, Mr. Miller, often. He said he was delivering merchandise for his business. But it's strange, isn't it? Every time he borrows the car, he comes back late, sometimes past midnight. Where was he delivering to anyway?" "Well, that's what puzzles me, ma'am. Isn't online selling supposed to use a delivery service? Why would he deliver himself? And I've never seen him carry any actual goods when he left." I nodded slowly. The puzzle pieces were falling into place. Brandon wasn't delivering anything. He was going to an internet cafe or some other place to access the gambling sites. I excused myself from Mrs. Rodriguez and walked back home. In my heart, I was formulating a plan. I needed solid evidence before going to the police. Not just bank records, but external testimony. 2 days later, Detective Reese called me. "Mr. Miller, could you come down to the station? There are a few things we need to discuss." I arrived at the police station that afternoon. The room was small, stuffy, and smelled of old coffee. Detective Reese sat behind a desk with a stack of files. "We've examined Mr. Brandon Miller's cell phone," she said, opening one of the files. "There are some interesting things there." She showed me several printed screenshots. The first image, an online gambling account with a username clearly belonging to Brandon. The last balance was 0. A betting history showing hundreds of thousands of dollars lost over 6 months. The second image, a voice message from Kayla. "When your dad is locked up, we can take care of the house together, right? The title is in his name. If he's in prison, we take control." The voice was clear, with no hesitation. It was Kayla's voice. The third image, a fake job offer letter. It was created using image editing software, complete with the logo of a startup that never existed. The executive's signature was taken from the internet. "So, there was no job in Silicon Valley?" I asked softly. "None, sir. It was all a fabrication. We contacted the company whose logo was used. They never received an application from Mr. Miller." I looked down. The celebration dinner, the chicken skewers we ate, Kayla's smile, the neighbors' congratulations, all of it was fake. All a performance. "We also checked the accounts of Mr. Brandon and Mrs. Kayla," Detective Reese continued. "There were large transfers from an account in your late wife's name. It seems they had access to that account." I froze. Maureen's account. It was a small savings account she'd built up from selling homemade pastries. Not much, but it was hers. I'd kept the bank book in the closet untouched as a keepsake. "How much did they take?" I asked, my voice hoarse. $15,000, taken in stages over the last 3 months. It felt like being slapped with hot iron. Not because of the money, but because it was my wife's money. The money she had painstakingly saved, waking up before dawn to bake, selling door to door with a basket on her back. I took a long breath. I want to file a full report on all of this. I brought the transfer records from my own account, too. Detective Reese nodded. "Please do, Mr. Miller. We will process everything." I walked home with heavy steps. When I got there, Kayla was sitting in the living room. Her face was calm, as if nothing had happened. She even greeted me warmly. "Dad, have you eaten? I made some fried rice." I looked at her for a long time. That face. A face I had once considered my own daughter's. Now it felt alien. "Kayla, sit down for a minute," I said in a flat tone. She sat across from me, her hands folded in her lap. Still calm, still performing. "The $4,000 you transferred to my account a week ago, where did it come from?" Her expression changed slightly, but she quickly composed herself. "It was to pay the doctor, Dad. Brandon was sick yesterday." I opened my phone and showed her the screenshot of the bank statement. "That money came from your account, and 2 hours later, it went to a gambling website. Care to explain? Kayla fell silent. Her hands started to tremble. I don't know, Dad. Maybe Brandon used it and you stayed silent. You didn't know what he was using it for? Lie. My voice was still flat but firm. You knew. We even have a recording of your voice talking about taking over the house once I was in prison. Kayla immediately stood up, her face white. That was just a joke, Dad. I wasn't serious. A joke? Planning to frame your own father-in-law as a joke? She started to cry, but her tears did not move me. There had been too many lies, too much pain. I just followed Brandon, Dad. I didn't know it would go this far. I'm a victim too, she cried, her voice rising with false emotion. I stood up, looking at her for the last time. You knew, and you chose to stay silent. And sometimes silence is crueler than the perpetrator. I walked to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. My hand was shaking as I held my phone. I called Mr. Peterson's lawyer, the one who often helped local residents with property and inheritance matters. The next day, I met the lawyer, Mr. Douglas. He was an old man, but still sharp. I want to freeze access to the house deed and all accounts under my name and my late wife's, I stated directly. Mr. Douglas nodded, taking notes. Is there a specific reason, sir? I told him everything. Brandon's setup, Kayla's involvement, the money taken from my late wife's account, and their plan. Mr. Douglas listened seriously. Very well, sir. I will draw up a power of attorney that restricts their access to all family assets. And I strongly recommend that you file a formal report with the police with all this evidence. I nodded. I already did that yesterday. Good. Then the process will be faster. 6 days after that night, Brandon was officially detained. The police held him for 20 days for further investigation into defamation, falsification of evidence, and conspiracy to frame a parent. The news reached local reporters. They came to the house asking for interviews. I refused. But the gossiping neighbors had already spoken. The next day, the story appeared in the local paper with a large headline. Son frames father for inheritance. Arizona case shocks residents. I read the paper on the porch with mixed feelings. No pride, no joy, only sadness to see my family name spread like this. On the local news, Brandon's face appeared as he was being escorted out of the police station to be moved to a detention facility. Reporters chased him with microphones. Brandon said, his face weary, I just wanted to help my family out of poverty, but everything backfired. I turned off the TV, unable to watch any longer. A week later, the police called Kayla in for questioning. She was not detained, but was declared an passive accomplice. She was ordered to report weekly, prohibited from residing in the house while the property was under legal dispute, and told to find new lodging within 30 days. Kayla was hysterical when she heard the decision. She came to the house, pounding on my bedroom door. Dad, help me. I have nowhere to go. My parents won't take me back. I opened the door and looked at her expressionlessly. You chose to follow him. You face the consequences. Don't come back here. I closed to the door, listening to her cries outside gradually fade away. That night I stood in front of the house for the last time, and the house I had decided to sell. I had signed the purchase agreement with a young couple from Seattle. They would move in next month. As I was staring at the quiet street, a neighbor handed me a small letter from the post office. A worn white envelope with Brandon's handwriting. I opened the letter under the porch light. The writing was messy, as if written with a trembling hand. Dad, I know I was wrong, but I don't know who else to be anymore. I'm tired of being the son who was never good enough in your eyes. I'm tired of feeling like a failure. I just wanted you to see me succeed, but I did it wrong. Forgive me. I am still your son. But from now on, I don't know who I am. I folded the letter slowly. No tears came out, just a deeper sense of emptiness. I put the letter in my pocket and went inside the house that would soon no longer be mine. I never imagined that the only child I had held when he was little and had a fever was now standing in a courtroom with his hands cuffed. And what hurt even more? He still called me Dad, even though he was the one who dragged me to hell. After the formal report was filed, the trial was scheduled at the Maricopa County Superior Court 2 weeks after Brandon's detention. I received a summons as the key witness and victim, having to sign an official statement detailing all the damages and defamation I had endured. The mental pressure was immense. Many neighbors started to keep their distance, afraid of getting drawn into the family case. Gossip circulated, whispers in Mrs. Rodriguez's store. Maybe the father had financial problems before. Why would his son go that far if there wasn't something he was hiding? I heard the whispers as I walked past the store. But I wasn't angry. I had no energy left for anger. I just kept walking, head bowed, carrying my grocery bag full of vegetables and tofu. The night before the first hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the back patio, staring at the dark sky. No stars, only thick clouds covering everything. In the morning, I went to Maureen's grave, carrying white jasmine wrapped in newspaper. I sat beside her tombstone, which was covered with a thin layer of moss. Today, it will all end. If you were still here, you might be crushed too. Thank God you don't have to see any of this. I wiped the tombstone with a wet cloth, cleaning off the dust and dry leaves. Then, I sat again, silent, until the noon call to prayer echoed from the nearby church. The trial began that afternoon. The courtroom was packed with local reporters and curious residents. The atmosphere was somber and tense. I sat in the witness box, hands folded in my lap, looking straight ahead. Brandon was brought in, hands cuffed. His face was pale, his eyes swollen as if he had been crying. He glanced at me briefly, then quickly looked down. Kayla sat in the audience, her face hidden by a large scarf, trying to remain unseen. The prosecutor stood and read the charges in a loud, firm voice. The defendant, Brandon Miller, is charged with the felony of falsification of evidence, defamation against a parent, and conspiracy to commit slander with the intent to gain financial benefit in the form of inheritance. The room was silent. Only the sound of the indictment papers being turned by the prosecutor could be heard. Then, the security camera footage from Mr. Reyes's house was replayed. The large screen in the corner of the room showed the familiar image, Brandon pacing nervously, glancing around, then slipping something into my briefcase. His actions were clear, undeniable. After that, the audio recording of Kayla and Brandon was played. Their voices were very clear in the quiet courtroom. When your dad is locked up, we can take care of the house together, right? The title is in his name. If he's in prison, we take control. Several people in the audience murmured softly. Some shook their heads, others looked at Brandon with disgust. Then, the digital evidence was presented. The fake job offer letter created with image editing software, screenshots of the online gambling account, with a betting history of hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the account statements showing the flow of money from my late wife's account to Brandon and Kayla's, and then to the gambling sites. The judge looked at all the evidence with a serious expression. He asked Brandon, "Is this your voice in the recording?" Brandon was silent for a long time, his lips trembling. Finally, he answered in a hoarse voice, "I forget." "Forget?" The judge raised an eyebrow. "Or do you choose not to admit it?" Brandon didn't answer. He just looked down, his body shaking. Next, the witnesses were called. Mr. Reyes came forward. He stood straight despite his age. I saw Brandon acting strangely lately. He often talked to himself near the fence. I even saw him secretly taking pictures of his father's house from outside the fence. The judge took notes. Oh, anything else? He also once asked about the prices of houses around here. He said he was surveying for a friend, but the way he asked was strange, like someone calculating profit. Then an expert from a digital security firm was called. He explained that the job letter Brandon claimed as proof of employment was fake. This letter was created with image editing software. You can see from the hidden data in the file. The creation date does not match the date printed on the letter. The company logo was also taken from the internet, not from an official document. The judge nodded. So no company actually hired the defendant? No, Your Honor. We have contacted the company whose logo was used. They never received an application from the defendant. Several character witnesses were also called. One was Mrs. Rodriguez from the store. Mr. Miller is too patient. We even saw him giving money to Brandon when his back was hurting, and he still went to work lifting shingles. We told him, "Sir, don't be too kind, or you'll be taken advantage of." And it turned out to be true. Mr. Peterson, the HOA president, also testified. Mr. Miller borrowed money from me for Kayla's medical bills. He said Brandon told him his wife was seriously ill. Mr. Miller paid me back over 6 months, never late, not once, even though I know he was struggling himself. I even offered to let him pay it over a longer period, but he paid on time. The courtroom was silent, listening to the testimonies. Several reporters scribbled quickly. The judge looked at Brandon with an expression that was difficult to read. It was Kayla's turn to give her statement. She walked up with trembling steps. Her face was wet with tears. She stood before the judge, her body shaking violently. "I was just scared," she said, her voice choked. "Brandon said if his dad went to jail, we could start over. I just went along with it. I didn't know it would go this far. I'm a victim, too." The judge looked at her sharply. "But you knew the plan from the beginning." Kayla paused, then nodded slowly. "Yes, but I was afraid not to go along with it. Brandon would get angry. So you chose to help frame your own father-in-law rather than stop your husband." Kayla cried harder, not answering. The judge sighed. "Please return to your seat." Finally, it was Brandon's turn to give his final statement. He stood with his hands still cuffed. His face was pale and tired. He looked at the judge, then glanced at me briefly. "I just wanted to be a real family man, but Dad kept controlling everything. I was tired of being told what to do. I wanted that house. I wanted to live without having to beg. But my method was wrong." His voice was flat, devoid of genuine remorse, just exhaustion and frustration. The judge looked at him for a long time. "You feel you are the victim of your own father, who raised you alone after your mother died? The father who sold his beloved scooter for your wedding expenses? The father who worked until his back ached to meet your endless demands for money?" Brandon remained silent. No answer. The judge struck the gavel. "Court adjourned. The verdict will be read next week." The following week, the courtroom was packed again. Everyone waited anxiously. I sat in the same seat with the same feeling of emptiness. The judge read the verdict in a firm voice. "After considering all the evidence and testimonies, the court finds the defendant, Brandon Miller, legally and convincingly guilty of the criminal acts of falsification of evidence and defamation against a parent. The defendant is sentenced to 7 years in state prison without parole." The room erupted. Brandon slumped into his seat. Kayla cried loudly in the audience. The judge continued, "For Kayla Arini, found involved as a passive accomplice, she is sentenced to 2 years of probation, with the requirement to vacate the house within 30 days and prohibited from approaching Mr. Miller during the probationary period." The gavel struck 3 times. The session was over. As the verdict was read, Brandon looked at me with red eyes. He stood up and shouted a sentence that echoed in the room. "You'll be alone forever, Dad." I didn't answer. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I simply stood up, picked up the small bag I'd brought, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Outside, reporters chased me with microphones and cameras. I didn't answer a single question. I kept walking, leaving the courthouse, boarding a public bus, and going home to the house that would soon no longer be mine. That night, I sat in the empty living room. All my belongings were packed into boxes: my wedding photo, Maureen's prayer book, a tool bag, my old gray jacket. Everything important was ready to go. Tomorrow, I would leave this house, leave Phoenix, leave all the memories that were too painful to keep. I looked at our wedding photo, already stored in the bag. Maureen was smiling widely in the photo, a genuine smile, full of hope. I whispered softly, "I'm sorry I couldn't protect Brandon the way you hoped." But I tried. I truly tried. Sometimes people think revenge is about returning pain for pain. But true revenge is when we choose to live without those who hurt us. I hired a pickup truck to carry my things. It wasn't much, just a few boxes of clothes, old photos, usable tools, and Maureen's prayer book. I left the rest for the house buyers. They said they would use all the existing furniture. I didn't mind. It was lighter that way. My destination was Flagstaff, Arizona, a cool mountain town, far from the hustle and bustle of Phoenix. A small wooden cabin was there, left by an old friend who passed away 3 years ago. The house was empty, and his family offered to let me rent it cheaply. It was enough for someone who didn't need much anymore. On the drive, the car radio played old songs Maureen often listened to while cooking in the kitchen. I didn't turn it off. I let it play, like a companion on this long journey. There was no longing to return. No nostalgia for the house I left behind. Only a strange relief settling over my chest. I arrived in Flagstaff late afternoon. The cool air immediately bit at my bones. It was so different from the humid, stuffy heat of Phoenix. I took a deep breath. The air was clean, fresh, like cleansing my lungs of all the dust and sadness that had clung to me for years. The wooden cabin was small, simple, but sufficient. It had one bedroom, a living room merged with a small kitchen, and a front porch that faced a field and the hills. From the porch, I could see a small church across the road. Its roof was dark green, and the sound of its bell rang clearly at the top of every hour. I spent the first day cleaning, sweeping the wooden floor that creaked softly, mopping with soapy water, opening all the windows to let the fresh air in. Then, I organized my belongings. Maureen's photo was placed on a small shelf next to her prayer book. Clothes were stored in an old wooden closet that smelled of cedar. My neighbors were friendly. Mr. Johnson, a vegetable farmer who left for his fields every morning with a hoe on his shoulder. He greeted me with a sincere smile when we first met on the road. "New here, sir? Welcome. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." I smiled. "Thank you, sir. I'm Raiden. I'm John. My house is the green one. If you want to attend service, the church is nearby. We go together often." I nodded. It felt warm to hear such a sincere greeting. No suspicious stares, no whispers, no probing questions, just simple kindness from people who didn't know the pain I carried. Mrs. Davies, the neighbor on the left, was also kind. She came over that afternoon with a plate of chili con carne leftover from a family gathering. "This is for you, sir, so you don't have to cook on your first day." I accepted it with genuine gratitude. "Thank you so much, ma'am. I apologize for the trouble." "It's no trouble, sir. We help each other here. It's the norm." That night, I ate Mrs. Davies' chili con carne with warm white rice. It was delicious, spicy, and warm in my stomach. I ate alone at the small table, but I didn't feel lonely. Instead, I felt peaceful, a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. Every night I sat on the porch with a hot cup of tea, staring at the sky full of stars. In Phoenix, I rarely saw stars due to pollution and city lights. But here the stars twinkled brightly, as if greeting me. I reread Brandon's letter from the detention center. The letter he wrote with a trembling hand, full of regrets that might or might not have been sincere. "I forgive you, but I will not return, and you should not look for me." I wrote a short reply on a scrap of paper, but I didn't mail it. I kept it in a small desk drawer. Maybe someday I would send it, or maybe not. What mattered was that I had written it, that I'd taken it out of my chest. The first week in Flagstaff, I attended the Friday service at the small church. The sermon was simple, about patience and sincerity in life's trials. I listened intently. Every word felt like it touched my heart. After the service, Mr. Johnson invited me to chat on the church porch. "Where are you from, Mr. Miller?" "Phoenix, sir. Quite a distance. Do you have family here?" I shook my head slowly. "No, just looking for a quiet place." Mr. Johnson nodded understandingly. He didn't ask further. It seemed he knew there was a wound that didn't need to be probed. It just needed to be left to heal on its own. Every Friday after that, I helped clean the church grounds, raking dry leaves, tidying up the parishioners' shoes, sometimes helping to carry water jugs for baptism. It wasn't hard work. In fact, it was pleasant, like giving without expecting anything in return, like cleaning my own heart and with my own hands. One day, I went to the notary's office in the small town near Flagstaff. I signed a small deed of gift, donating the remaining savings from my late wife's account to renovate the small meeting hall near my new home. The amount wasn't huge, only $15,000, but it was enough to fix the leaky roof and repaint the peeling walls. The hall's committee was surprised to hear about the large donation. They came to my house to thank me repeatedly. I just smiled. It's from my wife who passed away. She would be happy that her money is being used for something good. They nodded respectfully and went home with relieved smiles. My life was simple now. Waking up before dawn for prayer, then sitting on the porch to watch the sunrise, breakfast with toast and hot tea. Sometimes I walked to the small market, bought fresh vegetables and fish, cooked for myself, and ate alone. But my heart was calm. In the afternoon, sometimes I helped Mr. Johnson in the fields, pulling weeds, watering plants, or just having a relaxed chat while watching the sun set behind the hills. "Mr. Miller, you seem used to hard work, don't you?" Mr. Johnson asked one afternoon. "I used to be a handyman, so I'm used to lifting heavy things." "Ah, that explains the strong hands. If anyone needs a home renovation around here, I'll recommend you." I smiled. "That would be fine, sir. It's nice to keep busy." And sure enough, a few weeks later, a neighbor asked for my help fixing their leaky roof. I accepted happily, not for the money, but because I needed the occupation. I needed my hands to keep moving so my mind wouldn't wander. Kayla briefly sent a message from an unknown number. The message was long, full of apologies and pleas to meet. I didn't reply. I blocked the number and didn't open it again. Brandon also sent another letter from prison. This time, the letter was shorter, only a few lines. "Dad, I regret everything. But I know you won't forgive me. I just want you to know. I still remember all your kindness. I'm sorry." I read the letter on the porch, sipping warm tea. No tears, no anger, just an emptiness that was slowly being filled with peace. I didn't reply to the letter, but I prayed for him after every service. I prayed that he would learn from his mistakes. I prayed that he would become a better man. Not for me, but for himself. The house in Phoenix was occupied by the new family. I heard from Mr. Reyes, who occasionally called. He said the family was nice, with 2 cute young children who often played in the yard. "The house is lively again, Mr. Miller, like when Brandon was little." I smiled, hearing that. It was good to know the house was filled with warmth again. The warmth that was once there, then lost, and now returned with a different family. There was no resentment in my heart. No desire to see Brandon suffer. I only wanted him to understand that you shouldn't exhaust all love until nothing remains. To understand that every choice has a consequence. To understand that growing up isn't about getting what you want, but about realizing what is right. One morning, as the church bell rang for the morning service across the field, I stood and washed myself for prayer. The sound of running water, the scent of the morning dew, and the cool mountain air touched my skin. I prayed sincerely, no longer asking for justice, no longer asking for retribution, just asking for the strength to keep going, asking for the sincerity to forgive, and asking for peace for a heart that had been wounded for too long. After the prayer, I sat on the mat, watching the sky lighten. Birds began to chirp, and a gentle breeze moved the window curtain. And for the first time in my life, I felt whole. Not because I had won, not because I had successfully retaliated, but because I had chosen the right path. Even though that path was painful because I chose to let go. Even though letting go felt like tearing off a part of myself, I stood up, folded the prayer mat, and went out to the porch. The sun was beginning to rise from behind the hills, illuminating the field with a golden light. I took a deep breath, then exhaled slowly. This was not a heroic ending. There was no glorious victory, No overflowing happiness. But it was a peaceful ending. An ending that gave me room to breathe again. My life now wasn't luxurious, but it was clean of deceit, clean of lies, clean of people who only saw me as a source of money. I didn't want Brandon to suffer forever, but I wanted him to understand. Not all love should be exhausted until nothing remains. Not all sacrifice should be repaid with betrayal. And I, for the first time, chose myself. I chose tranquility. I chose to live without the heavy burden I had carried on my shoulders for so long. Revenge never takes us back to the past. But sometimes, it is the only way to save what little future we still have left to hold on to. I walked to the kitchen, brewed a cup of warm tea, and sat on the porch, staring at the green field. No more thoughts of Brandon, no more shadows of Kayla, no more house in Phoenix. There was only me, a cup of tea, and the sky beginning to brighten. Enough. This was finally enough.